Hello, everybody. Welcome to 3-Point Perspective, the podcast about illustration, how to do it, how to make a living at it, and how to make an impact in the world with your art. I'm Jake Parker.
I'm Lee White.
And I'm Will Terry. And all three of us are professional illustrators. We've all worked for all the major publishers in the business. Together, we published somewhere around 75 children's books, and we've all taught illustration at university art schools.
That's right. Each week we come at you guys with fantastic illustrator interviews or questions from people just like you. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we argue, but each time you learn something brand spanking new.
That's right. Today we're going to get into a couple different topics here, but I think we'll kick it off with this question that we got from, let's see here. It says right after that, can we use your name on the air? No.
Well, but that maybe that's last name, because I mean, like, how many are there?
This one is specific and we cannot say it.
I'll have Daniel put a little quack noise when I say his name.
Wow. we had to do it, didn't we?
Yeah. There's no way somebody could say quack without you quacking.
Whack.
Quack.
All right. The subject line is love, illustration, and money. Hey, Jake, Lee, and Will. I'd really love to hear the three of you talk about your experience with your spouses becoming part of your illustration careers, especially stories from early on in your relationships. I'm asking because my girlfriend and I are talking about getting married, and she's also expressed willingness to help me with my business, especially with the admin side. She works in finance. I'm really grateful that I have her support in this, but a part of me is still nervous to let someone else into this part of my life. I believe all three of you have said that your wives are at least somewhat involved in your businesses, if not helping you run them. So I'm really curious how the beginnings of that looked like for you and any bumps you've had along the way. Thanks, guys.
Should I be the first to answer this? Because I have got the spouse with probably the most vested in all of it.
Probably, but tell us where you're at now and tell us where you were at when you guys were like dating and how that got started.
Back in the day, so I'll start off with now. So now you guys may have heard us talking about, hey, if you have problems, email email Lisa at SVSLearn. That is my spouse and significant other. We've been together for 26 years now, 27 years, something like that.
Yeah.
That's a long time. And she is an integral part of SVS. She's one of our only truly full-time employees, and she is really full-time. Let me tell you.
She's in the credits at the end of each podcast, right?
Yeah. She it's a minimum of 40. A 40-hour work week would be a light week. She is she basically does sort of everything. She sort of knows how the entire thing works. She's on the back end of making sure we've aren't paying for software we're not using. She's dealing with students like, I can't log into this class. Well, she's the one that will help you do that. She figures out billing problems and I mean, she's found
scheduling stuff.
It's just, I mean, she's just really, really all that. Matter of fact, we had a huge problem last year that was probably the beginning of us switching our entire community when we found out like one of our software reporting packages, Chart Mogul, can go to hell. They over-reported basically anybody who bailed on a subscription and didn't, or like their credit card didn't work or whatever, it still counted them as a subscriber. So it was like really overloading what we were making. And so our books were all over the place, and she's the one that spotted that discrepancy. So anyway, so that's her role at SVS. And then she also handles all of my shipping for my prints and all my card orders and all that stuff. And then she cooks 3 meals a day, which is, she's a superwoman. I mean, it's incredible, the stuff that she does. So that's what it's like now. It's everything. And so if something happened, oh my gosh, I don't know how I would bridge that. I don't even know what's going on. I just show up and she'll literally throw something under me and say, sign this and put a note to that person. And so
amazing.
I write it, my little note, and then it goes away. And then I never see it again. I don't know who it went to. I don't know where it went. I don't know how it got there. That's now. So it started out probably similar to this person asking this question, in that there's too much to do, or there's a certain skill set that you lack. In my case, that's sort of how it's really started, is that my skill set is moving forward quickly. And, you don't think of that as being a skill set, but as I've watched other people throughout my career, I realize it is a huge skill set, to where you say, like, she and I will be talking about something at dinner, and the next day I'll say, oh no, that's live. It's live. It's the worst version of whatever we were talking about. but I made it. I made it last night, and now you can go see it. Here's the website.
Yeah.
And she'll be like, what are you talking about? We were just talking about that. And I'm like, no. It's a thing now. And now you need to go clean it up. So that's my skill set is implementation. And I think Jake and Will are in similar boats. We jump fast, and it might not be like, finished, not perfect, like Jake says. But we get it built, and then you start making it better and better and better. So that's my skill set. Her skill set is not that. If it was relied on her to launch, we would never launch, because she is so thorough on the back end of making sure everything's set up. The T's are crossed, the I's are dotted, and she cares about the details. How are we going to ship all this stuff? How are we going to make all this work with the time frame that we have? And she is a planner in that way. And so I guess you got to think about what your personality is. That's the best reason I can think of for doing this kind of thing, is where I fall off, that's her actual strong suit, and where she falls off, that's my strong suit. And so it works really well in that capacity. I couldn't do it without her, to be honest, because I can't focus enough on that stuff, and it's so boring to me that I wouldn't get it done.
Yeah. When you guys were first dating, what was your involvement in art? Did she meet you before you're like, hey, I'm going to go to art school and become an artist? Or?
We started dating literally when my TV, like, we had been dating for like probably 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, when my TV set broke, and I was like, I'm going to be a painter now.
So she really knew what she was getting into.
Yeah, so I went and bought all this. She was like, where are we going to store all these canvases? Again, the practical side of it. I come home from an art store, not with one canvas, but like 10 canvases. And I'm like, I am now a painter. I've got my basic set of acrylics that literally say the word basics on them. That's the acrylics that I bought, And she's like, okay, we're doing this now. This is our life now. I start painting. And so she was there right when the whole thing started. And I was originally not in illustration. I wasn't even trying to do illustration. I was going to be a fine art painter. Matter of fact, when we first moved to Southern California, that was going to be my major, is fine art painting. And then once I looked around, I'm like, oh yeah, I should be a book illustrator. Like, this doesn't make any sense. I don't have any of the thoughts that fine art painting. Like, we go to these galleries and I'm reading some of the descriptions on why people made the work they did, and it just seems so silly and stupid. I'm just more practical than that. I mean, I have a lot of energy and drive and stuff like that, but there is a certain amount of practicality. Like, why are we making this image? Like, those descriptions are like, oh, the metaphysical world embracing my passion, and it's just like a word salad. And then so I switched to illustration. So she was sort of a part, and she was game. Like, she's accepted me for all of that. Like, we moved out, I quit my job and we moved to Southern California all within the span of like 2 or 3 months. I mean, it was, I upended our whole life, and I've done that multiple times. But the good thing is because she's watched this play out, she trusts me 100% when I say, oh, we have to do this thing. Matter of fact, when we first got to Portland, I had no money. I mean, none. And I had seen what happened in the real estate market in Los Angeles, and it hadn't hit Oregon yet, hadn't hit Portland yet. And I was like, we have to buy a house. We absolutely have to buy a house. And she's like, what are you talking about? We can barely afford our one-bedroom apartment. And that was in the, the fraudulent loan era where you could do stated income. So I had no job. I had a book, one book I was working on. I think it was like $12,000, and I already spent the first half. So I had like $6,000. But on the stated income, I put sort of what I felt like I should be making.
Right. What you're owed. The royalties you're expected for the book.
Yeah. So she came home one day, and I had bought a house, and I was like, guess what? And she's like, what? And I was like, we own this house. We got an offer accepted on this house. She's like, I'll never forget her first words were, oh, well, can I see it? And I'm like, yeah, let's go see it. So, but she trusts me, and it's happened over and over. I'm like, no, we need to do this thing. We need to do it now. We need to do it quick.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. And it's worked out, I'd say over 90% win rate when we invest in something. We need to do this. Like I did that with the prints. We were starting to do art shows. I was like, this is going to be big in our life. Let's invest in this. And we did the art shows for years. She helped me with all that stuff. I mean, she was an integral part of setting up art shows, going to the art shows, manning the art booth. But when we started making like $20,000 for a 3-day weekend, she's like, oh yeah, this is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I'll go next, and then we'll finish with Will if that works for you guys. So when I met Allison, we met in college, and we met at class, and she watched me drop out of school to take a job at an animation studio. So I got this job offer at Fox Animation, and she already knew I was an artist. I was doing art classes, and she thought it was cool, whatever. We weren't dating or anything. We were just friends. And then I was like, hey, I got this job for an animation studio. I can't do school at the same time, so I'm dropping out. She's like, are we still going to hang out and stuff? And well, yeah. I got nights, weekends, all that stuff. Like we're going to do stuff, because we had like this friend group. And so I went and started working for the animation studio. And then it was maybe 6 months later, we actually started dating and fell in love and talking about marriage and all that stuff. And even though the job didn't pay that much, the animation job, because it's very low level, it was like entry level work that I was doing. It was an in-betweener, which is you have animators, then you have animation assistants, and then you have in-betweeners below those. So it's like the work that the animation assistants didn't want to do, you hand it off to the in-betweeners. So it was low, and I think my annual salary was $19,000 for the year, right? This was late 90s. And I remember talking to her dad, because, I was like, hey, I was being very traditional, because I knew he was more of a traditional guy. So I asked for her hand in marriage, right? Like I was like, I really like your daughter. I'd like to marry her. And he's like, tell me again what you do for a living. Like, tell me again what this awesome. Is. And so I had to explain to him, and he's like, and I talked to him about the animation industry and like my projection, like where I was going to go with this and what the plan was. And he kind of scratched his head, because his whole life was construction and fabrication. And his business was essentially, he lived in the farming community, and he had like the number one ditch digging business in the farming community. And so he, calloused hands, shovel in the back of his truck, like everything, and I'm like, yeah, I like to draw pictures and
I'm sure in this conversation, the word cartoon came up.
Yeah.
Somehow when I talk to people that don't understand what we do, cartoon comes up. That word, it just discounts everything you're trying to do, even though it is sort of a cartoon.
Right.
It discounts it in a weird way.
So we get married, and I'm working at the animation studio, and there's a project called so this animation studio is called Fox Animation. Now Fox, 20th Century Fox, they opened up their animation studio. 20th Century Fox is like as ingrained into Hollywood, Southern California as any other studio, right? But for whatever reason, they're like, no, we want to open a studio in Phoenix, Arizona. And Phoenix, Arizona just happened to be the city that my little suburb was attached to. And so they open up the studio. They bring in Don Bluth and Gary Goldman, who are like rock stars in non-Disney animated feature films that make a lot of money. So like All Dogs Go to Heaven, American Tail, Land Before Time, like big rock stars. And so they're like, yeah, we're going to do it again, but this time with Fox. And they come out of the gates with Anastasia, which was a huge hit, like phenomenal hit, right? Um, and so they're like, well, what are we going to do for our next film? They're like, we're going to do something really edgy, something that's like, and at this time in animation, you had films like The Iron Giant, Treasure Planet, Atlantis. It was like, they were like action movies done with animation. And they're like, we want to do our action movie. And so they did Titan A.E, and that's what I got hired on to work on. And the thing you got to know about all those films is none of them really did well in the box office. So like all of them pretty much were in the red for each of the studios that made them. And Titan A.E had a $70 million budget, and opening weekend it made $7 million. Okay.
Why was it so crappy? Just a real quick aside, because I never saw it, but why was it so bad?
You know, I've worked on several animated films, and all of them are a hot mess up until like every film I've worked on. I'm just like, how do these things actually like get made, and how do people sit in a theater and really enjoy and watch them? You know, even though I could sit there and watch them, but and so when you're making it, you don't know if the thing you're working on is good or bad until it's finished, honestly. Like, cause you never see the full thing all together until
there's no sense of that, of like, oh, this is a good one. Or
they're usually
questionable. Yeah.
Right. I feel like there's always this phase where it's really bad, but then you can get a glimmer of it and be like, oh, I could see the vision. I could see the vision that we're trying to get here, and that's capable, or that's possible, right? But then it can also flip the other way. So like the pitch for Horton Hears a Who was so captivating. These two guys, Steve Martino and what was his name? Haywood. I forget his first name, but it was the story guy and the art director guy, and they were co-directors. And they get up and they pitched Horton Hears a Who, and I was just like, this is going to be the best film ever. This is amazing. And then you see the end product, and it's okay. It was okay. Like it wasn't amazing. And then there's films like Rio where I'm just like, this is breaking my soul to work on. And you see the finished product, and you're like, it's so fun and it's so cool and engaging. We're getting away from.
But why was it breaking your soul to work on it?
Oh, it's essentially there were like these scenes that they hadn't figured out yet, and the way that Blue Sky worked, and I assume other animation studios work, is if you're in the art department, you're sort of assigned a scene to like make it look the way it's supposed to look. So I was assigned this particular scene that was in story rewrites for like 6 months.
Okay.
You know?
So you didn't know what
and so I'd design it, and they'd come back and be like, well, we need action's going to happen on this side of the scene. So you got to go over there and design that. So now I'm like, all my work that I did previously is like unusable. So now we're over here and we're working on this side.
Got it.
And it was a lot of just back and forth and stuff like that. And I was getting burned out on animation. And I was, I had a graphic novel book deal with Scholastic, and I was getting like children's book deals, and I was just really interested in everything outside of, like, a more entrepreneurial version of making money through art than sitting in a cubicle. And the other thing too is like I realized that like my trajectory at the studio was capped. Like I wasn't going to be an art director at that studio because there's like 15 other people ahead of me to be an art director. And so I'm just going to be sitting in this cubicle for the next 20 years if I either if I don't leave, if I stay here. My wife is a part of this story, I promise.
We're getting there.
So Titan A.E comes out. It tanks at the box office. Chris Meledandri, head of Fox Animation, comes out to Phoenix, and he's like, everybody, you knew this was coming. We're shutting down the studio, and you're all laid off, right? So the dream was over. Jake Parker being an artist for a living was over. I was like, I guess I go back to school. I guess I try to figure out, how to do this. And I'm looking for a job as well because it was the middle of the semester, so I couldn't start school, and we needed money to pay rent, and there may have been a baby on the way. I can't remember the timeline there, but I was sitting there. A friend of mine was like, "Hey, I work at a call center. It's sales calls. You'd be great at it. You're conversational. You're good. Just come down here." And so I go and I interview at this job, and I'm just like, "This is it. I guess Jake's just doing art on the side for the rest of his life." I'm sitting there in this interview, and the guy's looking at my resume. He's looking at my work experience, and he's seeing like this guy who's just like can't even sit up straight. And he's like, "You don't really want this job, do you?" And I was like, "No, sir, I really don't." And he's like, "Well, let's not waste each other's time. I'll see you out." And I was like, "Thank you, sorry." And so he walks me out. I come home. She's like, "How's the job interview? How'd it go?" I was like, I told her what happened, and she's like, "Huh?" And she says, "You know what, Jake? There's a museum down the street, like literally a mile away from our house, because we lived in downtown Mesa. So there's a museum, and I was driving past. It was like a natural history museum, and I noticed that they're doing construction. They're building out a new dinosaur wing to the museum with all these dinosaur models and everything." She's like, "I bet they need an artist to like paint murals or something. You should go apply there." And I was like, "Okay." So I cobbled together a little portfolio. I went down there. I may have rollerbladed. I don't know. I'm still young, but I walk in and I'm like, "Hey, who's in charge of this, of the construction and building out this thing?" And they're like, "Oh, you got to go talk to Gene." And so it's like, "Hey, Gene, I'm an artist. I worked in animation. Here's my portfolio. Do you have a job for me?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'll put you to work tomorrow. I've got these two guys working on murals. They need an assistant. Like, let's go." And so right then and there, I went back home. I'm like, honey, I got the job. She's like, "Awesome. That's good." And right then and there, like, she instilled in me, she's like, "You're an artist. There's got to be work for artists. So go find it." And it's been that way ever since. Like, she's always been like this catalyst in me to be like, "Okay, what's the next job? What are you gonna do next?" So as soon as I lost that job, because it was like once the dinosaur wing was open, they didn't need artists anymore. But I was like already halfway through that job, looking for the next job, looking for the next opportunity. And I've been doing that ever since. And she's always been like this person who's like absolutely, obviously invested in me because we're partners, but a motivator. She's always been the one who's like, "Yeah, you can do it. You could do that." And she's even said to me, like, I feel like, when I've been down, she's like, "I feel like you lost your mojo, Jake. You got to get it back. You got to get out there. You're Jake Parker. You could do it." And so she's always been super supportive. She's been extremely practical as well, like the practical side of me, kind of like with Lee, where it's like, I'm the gas and I want to go and do these things. And she's like, whoa, let's think this through. Like, how's that actually going to play out? How's that going to pan out? And there's been times, anytime that I kind of go off on my own and don't involve her in it, I always screw something up. And anytime that I do involve her in it, it like always works out for the better, because she can see things through a real feet on the ground type of version of it, where I'm like the head in the clouds type of guy. So that's really our relationship with, if I pitch something to her, it can't just be like, "Oh, I got this cool idea." It's got to be like a very solid plan. Like, I want to do this for this reason, and here's what I think I can get out of this. And
So
here's
she's kind of
like,
your like business manager sounding board, so to
exactly.
speak.
Exactly. And there's sometimes like I love an idea and I really want to do it and I know it doesn't make any sense, so I won't tell her because I don't want her poking holes in it. And that's when I get in trouble. I'm like, oh man, I ordered too many pins or something like that, or I did, I went down this path that I should have had, my head on a little bit straighter doing it. So that's my relationship with her.
So I have a follow up.
Yeah.
I need the visual picture. When you were rollerblading down there, was it the old style with the knee pads, the uncool ones, or were you on the skater ones?
I had skater rollerblades.
Oh, okay.
And the only protective gear I wore was wrist guards because I could not handle a broken wrist with my line of work. So if you see it, like if you look at the scars on my body, it's elbows, knees are hashed, hips are like munched up, and somehow I've never hit my head because I know how to roll. I know when you fall, you roll, and that way you don't like come to a screeching halt on your forehead or something, right? But my wrists, absolutely perfect.
And then the second one is when you went down there and you were the assistant to the other two muralists. Were you the better drawer of the three of you guys?
I definitely had better drawing chops, but those guys really knew how to paint, how to do all the like they can knock out a landscape with clouds and stuff, and I was not there. I didn't know heads or tails of like how acrylics worked or anything, right? And honestly, the job turned out to be very little muraling. Like they handed me one job which was basically anything that was more tied down. Like, here is a skeleton of a prehistoric alligator. Here's a photo of it. We want this to be 13 feet wide, life size, on that wall right there. Go for it, Jake. And so I'm like tracing it with the light projector, and I'm going in and I'm like painting it and airbrushing, and like I'm just doing like a skeleton, which is maybe the easiest thing to do, as opposed to like we need a realistic like cloudscape, behind this dinosaur. I would not be the guy that could have done that at that time. But then there was other jobs like we just got in this like this prehistoric model of a sea scorpion, so it's like a scorpion this big that's carved out of styrofoam or whatever, but it comes to us white or gray, and they're like, Jake, do some research and figure out what this might have looked like. And so my job for that week was like painting it and like spray painting it and doing like the browns and the grays and the little tones on there to make it look realistic, and where it's shining in parts and where it's dull in parts. So it was like a really interesting job. Like every day was different. And then there were some days where they're like, hey, that Triceratops exhibit, it needs molding around the bottom. So just, can you add this molding to it? So I'm like adding rubber molding around the edge, like staple gunning it in or whatever. So it was everything in between. Cool job. I honestly, I would like, if I could work at a museum again, I would do it at drop.
Did you know that Nate Hale did the same thing? He worked at it. Yeah. Did you guys ever talk about that? Yeah.
Nowadays, the murals are a lot largely done with prints. They'll just do massive prints and just glue them on the wall.
I think our banter today, so if you guys that are listening stick around after the show, we typically talk about different stuff, personal stuff, whatever, tell little stories. I'd love to hear you guys' jobs before any art stuff at the end.
I'll tell you about my first job and how I got fired from it at 16.
I've got a couple of fired stories as well.
All right, well, let's hear it.
Okay. So I'm going to go back further and ask you guys, like, and think, for those of you listening, think about this. Like, if you, back when you were 18 or 20, now some of you probably are 18 or 20 or in your early 20s, but just know that, like, Well, would you guys, if you thought back to your 18-year-old, 20-year-old self, and the major decisions that you made in your life, if you could do it over again, would you make those exact decisions, or would you make different decisions today?
That's a good question. There's like this youthful naivete, that you kind of don't have, and you can never like capture, that you sometimes need in life. Right. And so definitely there'd be times where I'm like slapping myself over the head and be like, you idiot, don't do that. But then there's other times where it's kind of like the like the Lisa Lee situation, where you need a little bit of Lee in order to have success.
Right.
And the older you get, I feel like the more wisdom you have and the more ways you can understand how something won't pan out. So yes, I'd make some decisions differently, and some I'd be like, absolutely not. Like, let's I'm happy
wish
with
I
the
could
decision
go
I
back
made.
and think about my decisions, but I swear, and I'm not kidding when I say this, I feel like I didn't ever make a decision ever until I was at least 30. Like, I'm not kidding. Like,
It was all
it
just
seemed like a stream of
instinct.
consciousness. Yeah, total instinct. Like, what's happening literally right now is my concern. There was no planning stage. There was no future.
You're coming in a
there was
little
no-
quiet now, Lee. Just tilt that towards you or something.
I'm messing with the gain. How's that? Is that
There
better?
you go.
Okay. Yeah, there's just no planning, and it was all just it felt like a series of non sequiturs. That's how my life felt. Is like I remember some friends pulling into my driveway. I was probably 23, 24, and they're like, "Hey, do you want to go to Florida?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I just got in the car.
Didn't pack or anything.
No clothes, no nothing.
Wow.
No money, no clothes, no anything. I didn't even know what part of Florida we were going to.
See, that's a funny thing, because we did stuff like that too. I remember, like, hey, mom, dad, my friends are driving to Disneyland for the weekend. And they're like, oh, that sounds fun. Have fun. And no cell phones, barely a map. Like, we just knew you get on the 60 and you take it towards California. Right. And I tell my kids that we did stuff like that. Like, me and my friend Art were like, hey, their tickets to San Diego are like $80, super cheap flight. All right, let's go. So like on a Tuesday, we decided to go to San Diego. On a Friday, we flew out, and we land, and we're like, where do we stay? Oh yeah, we should probably find a place to stay. So we find a party, we find, some girls, and one of them's like, yeah, you could come stay at my house. And so we spend the night, and then we're like, it's Saturday, and like, what are we doing today? And like, oh, let's go. We just found people to hang out with. It's probably just like your Florida trip. Like,
I gotta say though, I miss that. That's the one thing about being an adult, quote unquote.
yeah,
That it just that doesn't happen. Nobody shows up and says, "Do you want to go to Florida?" in my driveway.
Right.
And
Well,
where I can see it.
there's a season for everything, right?
Mhm.
I guess my point with asking this question is, I'm not the same person I was
right.
when I was in my 20s, and you guys probably aren't either, and most people aren't. We're completely different people because we'd make completely different decisions. However, I agree with you guys. So because I've thought of this, if I could go back with what I know now, I would do totally different things, and I might have a miserable life. Because just because you can make quote unquote good choices, right, doesn't mean that you'll like those choices, right? And I love the choices that I did make that I wouldn't make today, because they've led me to where I am now, right? And I love where I am now. So hopefully I'd have the wisdom to, if I could go back, that I wouldn't mess with things, right?
Exactly.
But just in thinking of that, like, the reason I wanted to set it up that way was when I met my wife, Lori, who, if you've been following this podcast for a while, you know that she's now passed away and gone to heaven. And
5 years ago, right?
yeah, 6.
6.
Yeah,
Yeah.
6 years ago, almost. Not quite, but almost.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I don't want to go into that, but when we got married, we were still in college, and I hadn't proven myself at all.
Mm-hmm.
So she's like, the decision she made was like kind of what you said. Like, she hitched her wagon to a guy who was saying he wanted to be an artist,
Uh-huh.
which is stupid, right?
Yeah.
and then he doesn't have any work
Right.
because he's in school, and we just hit it off, and that was it, So she was there from the very beginning, and we basically made decisions like, okay, how are we gonna, like, school's coming to an end, and then you're gonna have to, like, we need money because we're, we were just living as poor as possible,
Mm-hmm.
through school. And I would get a summer job, and that summer job, I think that was one thing that gave her some confidence, was the summer job was working as a pseudo graphic designer at the University
Yeah.
of Maryland. And so she was seeing like, oh, he can get an art job, and then like the second year I went back to BYU, and I landed an art job there. So she's like, okay, so he's an artist. He can get an art job. Maybe this is going to work out. But
Mm-hmm.
we didn't really talk reality of like, hey, artists don't often pan out. You know what I mean? Like, we kind of like, it was like this elephant in the room that we kind of pushed aside. I'm not so sure that was the smartest thing. Not really making a solid game plan. But again, that's my 58-year-old brain
Right.
wanting to coach my 20-year-old brain, right?
Yeah.
But one thing that kind of fell in our laps that really helped us was my grandparents moved into my parents' house and made an addition on there.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather was suffering from congestive heart failure, and so he couldn't really do much anymore, and he needed full-time health care. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And my parents were like, you're trying to start your art business. We could pay a professional to come in and do this, or you could do it, and that way, and that would give you your room and board, and you could try to start your art career in Washington, D.C. So that's what we did. And that is exactly how I got started. And the reason why I include that story is because there's like, if you asked 100 illustrators that are working illustrators how they got started, every one of us is going to have a slightly different story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's many paths that lead to getting to a point where you're financially viable as an artist. And mine was living with mom and dad and taking care of grandpa for over a year. And that allowed me to hustle because I didn't have a commute, didn't have any expenses really. We made money. We made money from taking care of Papa. And I had to do everything, by the way. I could work in a hospital. I've seen it all. I've done it all.
Yeah.
And was really cool too, because it really, my side story, my grandfather was just hero in my life, and having to take care of him that way was humbling for him. It was really hard for him.
Yeah.
And it was really hard for me, because doing that kind of work is hard, especially when your grandfather's been the one telling you how it is. And now you're like, hey, grandpa, I got to do this now. Oh, I don't want that, we gotta change your sheets, we gotta do this,
Right.
So anyway,
But I think too that told your spouse too that you're like a worker.
yeah,
And I think that is what you want to see in a partner, is like, is this a person who, regardless of what their strengths are and their weaknesses are, whatever, will they just get down and get to it and do whatever it takes?
yeah,
And I think that's what if you're trying to prove yourself, that's what you kind of got to show yourself doing. And if you're looking for somebody, you got to see what will they take the crap job, because that's, that's going to make the difference
Yeah,
than not doing anything.
absolutely. The real challenge hit when we decided to leave and go back and to Utah and to try to make a living as a freelance artist. That's when, like, it was pretend living with mom and dad, even though I was working hard and getting work. I was getting freelance work. But the real test came when we rented an apartment, bought a car, had real bills, electric, and things would go well for a while. And it's hard to start freelance. It's not steady work, right? And sometimes it's too much work. So I would fluctuate between being like crazy busy where I couldn't do anything. I couldn't spend any time except working like 6 days, sometimes 7 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd have a month, and I still remember this. It was a February where I got one job for $800. Well, even back in, this was would have been in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
$800 is not enough to live on for a month. We needed at least a couple $1,000s in a month. And so, which probably sounds like crazy today because you can't live on $2,000 in a month today, right? But
Right.
we could barely get by on about $2,000 a month back then.
I mean, that sort of highlights the drawbacks of it too, is that if your significant other is helping you and doing that supportive kind of role, well, you're all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And that's a scary place to be. I mean, that's still where we are.
Yeah.
In my opinion, like if just say the art market tanks overnight, I mean, like if my wife had a corporate job and was making a bunch of money, it would be probably honestly better, really, because then at least we're kind of, our risk is spread across multiple things. But it's kind of scary to try to go all in. And then also, I'm sure, Will, that month that you didn't get any work, it's kind of embarrassing.
Oh,
Let's be honest. Like,
well,
it's not good.
Over.
Like,
you think you're like, oh, okay, this is the real world. I was pretending it was all a dream and a fantasy, and now it's coming to, this is what the truth is, and I'm going to have to go get a job.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so scary because I'd put so much work into becoming a freelance illustrator and this was like in the second year, and then all of a sudden nothing.
well,
And then March came around and I got like 5 jobs, and it was like, oh, okay, I still am an illustrator. And that cycle, by the way, has played out and it was like the next year or the year after that I got a calendar and I started marking down the jobs that I was getting, because I had to turn down lots of work, which it was this I was doing editorial work, and I actually marked down every time I turned down a job, because I was getting an average of 15 jobs a month, and that was all I could handle. This is before I was using the computer at all, and I just couldn't work any faster,
Right.
I was making really good money. And side note, spending all of it and then some. Stupid, so stupid.
How much did you make a year?
That's when I was making about $120,000, $130,000 a year in like 1997, 98, 99, and those years, all well over 6 figures. But living so stupid with the money.
So
you never
really
had
quick.
money, so you don't know how
I never
to
had
spend
money. Yeah,
it.
so we were doing really dumb stuff, and that ended up imploding on us, and that's a whole nother story. But basically, I turned down $70,000 of work one year, which was a whole nother career for somebody. Like I was like, this is amazing, and I thought it was going to last forever, because you get like that, right? But the real point that I wanted to make in this is that we would go, the one thing that my wife and I disagreed on was that we would go through these lean periods they were, none were as lean as that $800 a month, but really lean. And because we weren't managing our money well, it really hurt more than it should have, you know. And meanwhile, I had a friend who was like, save money, and don't extend yourself, and don't buy anything more than you need. And he saved for a house early on and bought a house. And so the disagreement that my wife had was, she finally got tired of the boom and bust cycles of Will Terry, you know. She was like, this sucks. I don't like this at all. And, you know, she'd get nervous about paying bills. I'm like, well, we can't pay that one right now. We got to pay this one. This one can wait. And she really, really, really wanted me to finish a master's degree and go teach at a college. And we had this ongoing, it wasn't a fight, but it was a struggle of her really wanting that, and me going, let's sit down and look at the numbers. And they don't work. Like, number one, I don't have $50,000 for school, so there's that, right? And so how do we cross that hurdle? Where do we get the money to even go to school? Two, if I go to school and I have to, and right now I'm working, like I was definitely following the J.C. Leyendecker credo, which is spend more than you make, right? And his, you know, this was during the golden age of illustration, when you know, they could do an illustration and make $2,000 or $3,000 in the early 1900s, right?
Right.
Like they could make enough money to buy 2 or 3 houses in one job, small houses, in one cover.
Yeah, I mean, that lasted even up into the 60s.
Oh,
James Gurney just posted on his blog, the guys that were doing car ads, the painted gouache car ads that you would see, those paid $5,000 to $6,000 a job for an illustration, when a house cost $5,000.
Right. It's crazy. Think about a $400,000 job or a $450,000 job.
Yeah.
Isn't the average home price now?
You guys aren't getting those?
Oh, obviously. Yeah. I mean, well, you're not.
A quarter-page ad.
We've talked about this on another podcast. The how illustrator salaries have stayed the same. But we would go back and forth, and she would say, well, I just really think that's what you should do. And at that time I had been teaching at UVU, and I knew all the faculty and everything, and I could have made that decision to go and try to do that, but on paper it didn't work. We were spending the money we were making and then some. We were in debt, and there really wasn't that option. So as far as this question goes, you know, I would say this: at least from my anecdotal experience, we both kind of wanted the same thing. We wanted a steady gig, but we were basically in this situation where it was hard to get it at that time. And we had put ourselves in that situation. And then I've talked about this extensively on my YouTube channel, where we went through a financial meltdown, and lost it was our second home at that point. And that was due to, you know, the 2008 housing crash. We were overextended, and we couldn't keep up with our bills. She got sick. She couldn't teach at that time. She was teaching school. And so we found ourselves in this situation of kind of like going through this real hardship of financial ruin, disaster. And what pulled us out was starting businesses. And she finally, luckily for me and my ego, I guess, she lived to the point where she was like, I can see your vision now, and I can see that you made some really good decisions, and I'm really glad that the things that you're working on are really paying off, and that we got to live for about a 5 or 7 year period where we bought another house and things were going great, and it was all based on the business decisions that I made in all of the above. Freelance, you know, we started SVS, and a bunch of other projects that did really well, that were self-publishing projects and stuff. So So yeah, but one thing that we never did during that whole time is we never did turn on each other to where we were just fighting over it. It was
Hmm.
stressful, but we worked together. And I think that's the most important thing is, you know, you got together because you love each other. You're both fighting for the same cause,
Hmm.
right? You both want the same success. And it's just about trying to figure out how to navigate that together and for whatever
Well,
it's worth.
let's.
I hope
I
these
mean,
stories
that's
help.
a good take on it. I mean, I think there is another side too that needs to be talked about, depending on how much help people are getting from the people around them in their life, significant other, friends, whatever it is your situation is, and that is you have to protect uh, the personal side of that.
Hmm.
I've noticed that. I mean, especially with, like I said, how intertwined my wife is with my work. Sometimes I realize like our conversations are, hey, can you send me that PDF file? Oh, wait, I emailed that to you yesterday. Oh, I didn't get it. Can you send it to me again?
Right.
I mean, that's the worst conversation ever to have with your
Right.
spouse. It's so
Right.
stupid. And you just have to watch out for that. But that becomes part of it. Hey, did you apply to that art show? Oh, I thought you did. I thought you were going to do it. Can you run this to the mailbox? Like it's just these little daily tasks, and you have to be on guard against that and how you're going to deal with that. How do you separate that from it becoming a work relationship, which is not what you want.
Hmm.
Right. Let me ask you, when you went to Japan, how many of those conversations did you have in that 2 week
Zero.
period?
I mean, we turned off. She has a problem. Like, I'm pretty good with like, oh, I'm off work, and I'm truly off work. Like, I don't really think at
Yeah.
all about it. And
We
she
know, we've
tends
tried.
to. Hey, you guys aren't much different, so can't say anything. Um, but she carries it with her. She's really responsible, and so she'd be thinking, oh, I got to get back to the hotel room so I can check my email and send this other thing and check this
Uh-huh.
file and all this stuff. I'm like, man, we're in Japan. You're not doing any of that. I'm
And
your
we
boss.
survived. All
we
of us
we
survived
lived. Yeah.
back here.
Well, that's sort of what I carry with me after doing this for such a long time. Is
Hmm.
that it always sort of works out like Will was saying, like you have the lean month and then all of a sudden the jobs come in or whatever. But Jake and I were discussing last week that like probably a couple times a year, yeah, didn't you tell me, Jake, you're like, I should get a job in an animation studio. And I think the same thing. I'm going to go back and just work full time at a university. It's just so much easier than doing what we do because everything is unknown. I mean, that's a
Right.
hard place to be when
Yeah.
I have this big house. I have a life. I have a kid who's coming up on college in a couple. Jake has 35 kids who are all college age. You get nervous, and it's hard. It's hard to deal with that. It's a tough one, and I don't know that goes away because unless you have a long-standing contract, like say you have, if you have 5 years in the future already mapped out, then it's a
Hmm.
different kind of feeling. Like there's one point I had 6 books contracted and I was only working on the first. So I felt somewhat stable because I knew those
Hmm.
5 books were coming down the pike. And then I had a full-time teaching job at some point. So you kind of, try to navigate these waters. A
Yeah.
little stability would be nice, but if you're in it with it's nerve-wracking when you're by yourself. If you're trying to carry somebody else with you, it can be, like I said, embarrassing. It can be nerve-wracking, and you got to have a relationship that can weather it. And that's the one thing
Right.
that I do have in my relationship is that we're just goofy all the time. And she knows, like I probably do 100 dances through the kitchen every day. I mean, she knows that's just part of our life is that I'm going to come through. I'll make up some stupid song. Like she'll be making hummus and I'll make up a song about hummus and I'll make up a
Right.
dance that goes with the hummus. And that's part of our life. So
Yeah. Keep it fun and interesting. I know I look at anybody who's had any success in illustration, in sort of an independent kind of career, and there's just this runway before the plane takes off, and you have to be confident in that runway, and that you're getting enough energy and lift for that plane to take off. Because I look at like, I could think of like Kazuki Buishi, William Joyce. These are people I know personally. Raina Telgemeier, all phenomenally successful in their illustration careers, selling millions of copies of books. But yeah, every one of them had 5 to 10 years of no success, of just grinding and like throwing stuff out there and getting like people interested and like, oh yeah, this is promising, but not, the money wouldn't be coming in. And so you either need to be comfortable with a bohemian lifestyle for 5 to 10 years.
That's a very elegant way of saying being poor.
Bourgeois bohemian.
Yeah. Or living off of your spouse's or your significant other, your partner's income, where they can sort of float you as you're getting this thing going. How do you know if it's not going to work? How do you know if it's not going to quit? Or if you should quit. You have to have, like, I feel like every year you have to be a little bit better off than you were the last year, either in regards of the kind of projects that you've finished and gotten paid for, the level, like the what is it, the profile, a higher profile situation. The pay not be matching it, but it might be that you're doing something that's turning heads, right? So every year it has to be building on top of of it. And if you get 3 years go by and you're still at like 1,000 followers and you haven't gotten paid for any work that you're doing, that's a good cue that something's not working. You're not on that. Your plane's just taxiing. It's not like gaining momentum. It's not taking off. So those are just some of the things I would just, in this early stages of the career, you really do. Like for me, it was, I got a job at an animation studio. Like that was a promising enough, like, indicator that I had the chops to do this as a career.
So you're sort of saying there's breadcrumbs along the way, and if you're not seeing the breadcrumbs, you're not on the path.
Exactly. And there's sort of this metric, essentially money. Getting paid to do something is sort of an unbiased measurement of if you're going to be successful or not. The reason for that is everyone is talk until it's time to like pay for something, right?
It's true.
Whether it's a publishing company or, a freelance job or fans, oh, I want to see that as a t-shirt. Okay. I got a t-shirt for sale right here. If you sell 100 t-shirts, you're onto something. If you sell 2 t-shirts, time to switch gears and figure out something else that works.
I mean, there's a lot of listening to, this is sort of a little bit of a segue to sort of a different topic, but you do have to listen to these little hints that come up in your life and pay attention to them. It's something I've been talking a lot about students in the community with, is paying attention to sort of what's happening in a very nuanced way. Like say you're doing, we encourage a lot of master copies. I tell people, pay attention to how that feels while you're doing it. Not just did you do a good result, but like a lot of people are concerned about finding your style and stuff like that. And that gut feeling of like, is this right for me, is something to pay attention to. And I'll tell you this, along the way, with my wife, as we have these conversations about how my career has unfolded, one of the things that I paid attention to early on was how much resistance I get from regular publishers when I'm pitching my own work. They parse it like I've never heard anybody, they overanalyze. It's a kid's book, and they're like, what's the motivation? Like this is a novel, like I'm writing War and Peace, and they complicate this simple idea. And it just felt like I was hitting a wall. Every time I talk to a publisher, they say something that makes me not want to do the project anymore. They'll suggest something that's dumb. But then I go do these art fairs, and the general public is like, oh, I really like this. Here's some money. And it wasn't just one, like you were saying, it was over and over and over and over, and they don't care. Like I would say, oh, you should do children's books. Hey, I've got an idea for a book. Let me run it past you. And then they're like, oh my God, that's amazing. And they're eager to buy it. Here's my email. Send it to me when you're done with that or whatever. And that's what made me start to lean into self-publishing, because I'm like, well, it's sort of like water, right? You always follow the path of least resistance. I mean, sometimes you do have to work through what is resistance. And I don't want to imply that this path was easy, but you do got to pay attention to kind of what's happening in the world and what the world is telling you, like the breadcrumbs. Where do the breadcrumbs lead? And a lot of people don't. They keep hitting their head against the wall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Well, let's wrap it up. I know
words of wisdom, maybe, or words of naivete.
Yeah, probably a little bit of both.
Right,
are we going to go
right.
into our jobs for our banter?
Will's got to go.
Heart out.
Yeah. Well, let's tell a quick little story. What about a quick little story?
Okay, quick story.
Let's just all give one story about how we've been fired, because Jake mentioned that earlier. Just do one fired story.
How we've been fired. I haven't been fired.
I'll go first. You haven't been fired,
Jake.
Will?
No.
You're not living. You're not putting it out there. Not living on the edge enough. Okay. My first job as a 16-year-old, I'm employable. I'm joining the workforce. I get a job at Sonic, the hamburger place, right? And it's within bike riding distance because I didn't have my license yet. So I'm riding my bike down to Sonic, and I'm working there, and they're like, okay, you're going to be in charge of French fries. We don't trust you with the hamburgers. We don't trust you serving. We don't want you talking to customers. Please leave that for the girls. And so I'm Jake Parker, the fry cook, French fries, right? And once they saw I could do that, they're like, okay, we trust him with onion rings, right? So I'm doing onion rings, and I should say Sonic, they make those onion rings from onions. They don't get like prepackaged stuff. Like they get onions
impressive.
in, they get the batter in. That's why they taste so good. That was back in the 90s. I don't know if that's how they do that now. But anyways, so I'm sitting there working on French fries like I know I'm supposed to do, and I'm shaking the salt all over them. And I'm like, man, we're out of salt. I gotta go. Hey, where's the refill for the salt? They're like, it's in the back there. So I go in the back, and there's a brown sack with white powder in it. And I'm like, the salt. So I scoop it in there.
Oh no.
And I go back, and I'm salting the fries.
Sugar in the fries.
The first customer comes back, and they're like, hey, something's wrong with your French fries. Something's weird here. And I was like, I'll get you a new batch. So I go in, batch, salt it, put it out there.
Sugar fry.
And the next one,
Flour, perhaps?
hey, these things are weird.
Sugar.
So finally, the guy comes back, the manager. He comes back. He's all, what the heck is going on with these fries? And he goes and he smells the salt. And he's all, show me the bag that you got this out of. I show it to him. He's all, this is detergent.
What?
This is like soap.
Oh no!
It was like
That's
the
even
detergent for
worse.
cleaning the dishes or something. It was like some industrial like stuff. And I was like, oh, he's like, what the heck? So we had to like clean it all out and clean out the whole fry thing and do all that. And I'm sitting there doing that, and we get it all fixed, and the day's done, and I'm like, hey, I was looking at the schedule. I noticed I'm not on the schedule next week. He's like,
Have a good life,
he's like,
man.
He's like, oh, don't worry, we'll call you. We'll call you. I was like, okay. They still haven't called me, and it's been like 35 years.
You work next week. You still have your outfit.
I'm waiting for that call. Call me up. I'll be there tomorrow.
That's a good one. I don't know if I could top that, but one summer, I just turned 16 as well, 16, 17, somewhere right around there, and saw an ad for there was a new mall opening up, and all these stores were hiring or whatever. So I put in my application, and I got hired at a clothing store. I think it was called The Limited. I think it's for women, but I was going to be, at first there was nothing. I mean, it's a giant empty store. So we were having to bring clothes and racks and all that stuff in from the trucks and all that stuff. And this is in Tennessee. It's in Nashville, and it's August. I mean, it is so incredibly hot. 100
And
degrees
humid.
with full humidity. And I don't do well in the humidity. I'm such a baby about it. I'll admit it. I'm terrible in that situation. And we're loading or unloading this truck and walking all this stuff in. And again, it's like one of those things where if I'm into something, I'm really into it. But if I'm not into it, I'm definitely not into it. So I'm bringing this stuff in, and I'm hot and I'm sweaty. But each time I would come inside, it's in the mall. And so it feels fantastic. It's like below the temperature it should be. It's nice and cool. It's like a movie theater, just very cold. And I'd done that for a couple of hours, and I was like, man, I'm just feeling hazy. Like I can't think that well. And so all these clothes are going on these racks, the circle racks that are in the mall, like when you go shopping in the store.
Yeah.
And so I thought, that spot, I could probably like skip one of these runs if I can just go in this rack. And so I
like hide out in the middle.
Yeah. So like a little kid does with their mom. So I open there's all this clothes on top of it and hanging from around the rack. And I open the door like I'm like, Hobbit going into Hobbit.
Like Narnia.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And I go in there and I fall asleep. And so and the only reason I know that is because all of a sudden,
Wait. This was because you just got back from that Florida trip.
It may have been. It was about the same time. But I get this tug on my leg because my legs had come out into the aisle. And they're like, that doesn't make any sense. There's legs with shoes attached to them sticking straight out of the floor level of this rack. And then so I come to, and I have no idea where I am. You go into one of those sleeps that's just like instantaneous. And
You're
I'm
out.
completely confused when I like work my way out of the rack. And then there's like three people, including the managers, just sitting there waiting to see who's in there and why are they in there. And I'm rubbing my eyes and I'm confused, and I come out and get this, I just walk out. I don't even say anything to him. I just left. And then like that was the right response to do. And
Right.
And then so the same thing as you, I waiting to get my schedule, the call for the schedule, nothing comes in, and like okay, I didn't call back. I sort of got the hint that
Yeah. Like
not on the schedule anymore.
imagine that manager. He's like, where's that Lee kid? Where is he?
The soft
sir.
firing. You just don't get. It's like what they do. What I've heard they do in high school football now. They let anybody on the team, so they don't have to. Anybody can play football, but you don't get a jersey.
Yeah, no cut sports, right?
And you don't get to play. So but you're on the team. Yay!
Looks good on the resume.
Right. All right. Well, I have one too, but it's
good.
It's the opposite of getting fired. So, is that fit?
You
at all?
got hired.
You got randomly hired.
No, it's not even that. It's weird. So, I'm working at McDonald's. This is when I was in high school, and I was a relatively good worker. Let me think. I was going to say a good worker, but no, I was relatively good. I did what I was supposed to do. I didn't go to sleep in a closet somewhere or in a coat rack.
Right. You didn't put detergent on the French fries.
I never put detergent on the fries. However, I did see a guy lift the broom or the mop handle to mop the floor right by the fry vat, and he hit the fluorescent light above, and it came crashing down into the fry vat when there was 3 school buses coming in. And we had to shut down the whole fry. We had to tell people for like 2 hours, or maybe an hour and a half.
Fries.
There's no fries. Like, how does McDonald's have no fries? Well, we didn't. There was glass in the fries.
Glass fries.
But no, so I'm I have so many McDonald's stories. I got sent out into the lobby because it turned out there was too many workers this Saturday. So they sent me out there to mop or to wash the legs of the chairs. Remember those old tables that were like permanently attached to the ground? And I had to like take a rag and like wash them. As people are like filling the lobby, I had to wait for somebody to be done, and then I'm down there bending over and wiping it. And my manager was having a bad day. I didn't know this, he comes out and he doesn't even look at it. He's like, not good enough. Do it all again. And I'm like, I just felt, so disrespected and so unappreciated.
Right.
And did I do the best job I could have? No. And I probably not. And I'm like, okay, so I did it all again. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, probably like 45 minutes later, I come back and he just goes, he sticks his head like, just like that, like to mock me. Like he's looking out in the lobby. He's like, not good enough. Do it again. And so I put the mop bucket back, got my jacket, put it on. He's like, hey, where are you going? And I didn't say anything. And I just walked out, got on my bike and rode home. Cause I was like, yeah, whatever your thing is, whatever you got going on, I'm not going to be part of it.
Yeah.
And
I
if
don't
it
wanna
cost
deal
me my
with that.
job, that's fine. I was that like,
Yeah.
I was that angry. By the time I got home, he had called my mom and totally apologized. He's like, your son's going to get home and he's going to be so angry and sad. And it's my fault. He took total responsibility.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And he's
That's
like,
cool.
we had too many people scheduled. I was angry that the other manager scheduled so many people and I took it out on him. Yeah.
Little Willie.
Yeah.
It's cool that he at least admitted it.
Yeah,
you
he
know?
did. So I went back to work the next day.
Nice.
Nice.
All right,
And-
that's our work life. Take us out, Jake.
I'll take us out.
That's good.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. 3-Point Perspective is made possible by SVSLearn, where becoming a great illustrator starts. Your hosts are Lee White, Will Terry, and I'm Jake Parker. Our podcast is produced by Daniel Tu. That's Daniel TU. Special thanks to our SVS team, our team manager, Preston Smith, our keeper of the curriculum, Austin Shirtliff, our show notes wrangler, Lily Howell, our chief operations officer, Lisa Fott, and our illustrator, Annalise Black. Now, go draw something.